Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I just recently got back from 20 days of travel and I documented most of it. This video will be a bit different from my regular vlogs since I'll just be voicing over the clips I took. Anyways, started off the trip with a short connection in Iceland on the way to Denmark. Found really cheap flights to Copenhagen and wanted to go back and visit anyway, so flew there first before flying to the other cities. This was the exact route I took 2 years ago when I studied abroad in Copenhagen, so it was quite nostalgic. Red-eye flights are never fun, but did what had to be done. Barely got any sleep since the sun rises really early far north, so it was already getting bright at 3 a.m. Soon enough, landed in Iceland, and fun story, last time I was here I missed my connection, so had 7 hours and was able to leave the airport and spend just about an hour in Reykjavik. No time this time, just about an hour layover and on to the next flight. Blessed with an exit row, so plenty of legroom, and made it to Copenhagen at about noon local time. Definitely felt surreal. Finally back at the airport, I took so many flights for weekend trips. So many memories and so many stories. It's like seeing an old friend again. Only in Copenhagen for one day as buffer before an early morning flight to Lisbon tomorrow. This first half of the trip was with my mom, and she actually visited me during my semester in Copenhagen, so it was a nice refresher for both of us, but mostly me. Sorry, Mom. Next day started early, a little jet lagged, but all good. Had some leftovers from my favorite bakery from yesterday, and made the way to the airport. Flight was surprisingly long at about 4 hours, and I guess Europe's just bigger than I thought. At the airport, just more nostalgia, remembering all of the trips I took in the past. 2 years ago, I also visited Lisbon, but because of a very complex travel story. In short, German workers' strike cancelled my flight and rebooked me through Lisbon, missed my connection, and had a completely free night in Lisbon because of the compensation. Only had a few hours to explore that time though, so had a very rushed city walk. Since then, I've always wanted to return, and if you have time, I highly recommend you go check out that video. Even though I didn't have a comprehensive visit last time, Lisbon felt so familiar. I was coincidentally retracing my steps. Had a nice lunch at Time Out Market, which I later learned was a chain. They literally existed in the next two cities I visited. Nevertheless, there are some decent food options, and I settled on this cod lunch special, which turned out to be a solid deal. About 20 bucks for pretty good quality seafood, a drink, and dessert. Afterwards, went on to Bellum, saw the Explorers Monument, and of course Bellum Tower. Place saved on my map for 2 years now. Had a quick stop to try the pastéis de Bellum, where it supposedly began, the Portuguese custard tarts. They're really good, but at around €1.50, they're quite pricey if you think about it. I think sometimes it can be easy to spend when you're on vacation because some currencies just make things feel less expensive than they are. Feeling satisfied after a sweet treat, made our way to Tram 28. It's a nice scenic ride through the streets of Lisbon and it's a fun tourist experience, but I feel really bad for the locals who have to deal with all the tourists. Had a nice dinner in Alfama, Lisbon's oldest and most historic neighborhood. Tried octopus salad, grilled octopus, and sea bass at a restaurant I cannot pronounce. Always try seafood at coastal cities and always try local dishes. Day 2 started off with a hostel breakfast. Shout out to Living Lounge Hostel. First stop of the day was Park Edward 7, and surprisingly the park is named after a British king. While book fairs are cool, it was unfortunate that it blocked what would have been a much nicer view. After walking around for a little, it was time to visit Castelo São Jorge. Hope my pronunciation was acceptable. Anyways, it was great panoramic views of the city, and even spotted peacocks in addition to the exhibits and of course the castle itself. Afterwards, had cod and seafood rice lunch, and then a visit to Praça do Comércio. Passed by St. Anthony Church and Lisbon Cathedral on the way, which are two very significant buildings, but I unfortunately forgot to film because after a while I think you just lose your appreciation for historical churches in Europe. They're everywhere. Lisbon especially was known as Seven Hills and 1,000 Churches. Took a nap before exploring tour sites again, walked up the Santa Justa elevator and then to Pink Street. Dinner was unremarkable and not sure if we were unlucky, but grilled sardines were quite bitter. Final day in Lisbon was actually spent outside of Lisbon on a day trip to Sintra with a tour group. We all boarded a bus for about a 40-minute drive. Once we made it off the bus, checked off some tourist activities in town before walking over to Quinta de Regalera. It's quite the estate with a large manual line design manor, as well as gardens and wells. Going down the initiation well, there is a tunnel network from which you can visit the unfinished well before making your way outside. There's a whole story behind it, but it's a bit complex to explain, so if you're curious, I recommend you look it up online. The next stop was Peina Palace, about a 20-minute bus ride up the winding roads. More manual line design and an interesting color palette. It has great views of mountains, and you can see the Atlantic Ocean and the Moorish castle. Our tour guide was providing a lot of history about the place that is a little too complex for me to reiterate, but again, if you're interested, I highly recommend doing some research online. After a little more than an hour of admiring the palace, it was time to finish the itinerary with a visit to the westernmost point of continental Europe, Cabo de Roca. This place is significant because to many people in the old world, this was the edge of the world until it became widely accepted that the earth was round. It was really windy here, but the views were amazing. Soon enough, it was time to go back to Lisbon. Spent the final evening reminiscing and retracing steps I took 2 years ago. It's difficult to describe what it felt like to be back, but I was really grateful my mom was able to join me on this trip. Thank you, Mom, for planning most of the travels. Had a good night's rest before making our way to the bus station in Oriente. Took a trip down memory lane once again and stopped by Alameda. This was essentially my first impression of Lisbon. Again, it felt surreal. Enough emotions though. There was a Flixbus to Porto to catch. The trip was smooth and there wasn't much going on, but we passed by a cigarette brewery and stopped at a rest area for 10 minutes before eventually making it to Porto. First impressions of Porto were great. There were so many people walking around and it felt a lot more dense than Lisbon. I'd never been to Porto before and was surprised by how many tourists there were. City walked and passed by so many landmarks. There was just so much history everywhere. I had to check out the world's fanciest McDonald's. The chandeliers and stained glass inside were quite uncharacteristic of McDonald's. Ordered some items not found in the US and feasted before heading over to Sao Bento Station. This station is mostly known for its azulejos. The tiles in the station tell the story of transportation in Portugal. Next up, the Ponte Luis over the Douro River. The trams drive on the bridge too, so you have to be careful not to be too distracted by views. Leaving Porto on the other side is Vila Nova de Gaia. It's a great place to watch sunset, but we arrived too early and eventually decided to head down to the lower level and get a different perspective of the bridge and Porto. Day 2 in Porto started with a walking tour. Highly recommend the free walking tours, but there might be a €1 registration fee, and you choose how much to tip at the end, but officially it's free. I learned so much about the history of the city as well as a lot of Easter eggs and hidden gems. I ended the tour at Gaia and decided to take the cable car down, and I actually don't recommend this unless you get a really good deal for tickets, but I personally didn't think it was worth it. Spent the afternoon exploring some churches, and that was about it. Looking back at the footage, this was an enjoyable ride, but as a skier, this isn't really much different from a gondola ride. Anyways, enjoy the views because I paid for it, so you don't have to. Stumbled upon this interesting store where they were making cod cakes right in front of us. The final day in Porto began with a walk towards the Atlantic Ocean. The original plan was to just take a Six Bridges cruise, but walking it was almost just as fun. After about an hour, made it to the beach and relaxed for a bit before heading back to where we started with a brief stop at Boa Vista. It felt a lot like Lisbon there, but eventually made it back and spent the afternoon at the photography museum, which was recommended by our tour guide from yesterday. It's free and it used to be a prison. Admired some cameras before heading back out to look for more churches and azulejos. Before leaving Porto, just wanted to check one more thing off the list, and it has to deal with food. Wanted to try Franciscina, a Portuguese sandwich from Porto. Hopefully pronounced that somewhat correct. Enjoyed the sunset by the river, and that was it. Off to Spain tomorrow morning. Next day began with another early morning flight, but this time to Barcelona. I've already been to Barcelona, but it's one of my favorite cities because of the architecture, design, atmosphere, and value. It's a beach city with great scenery and food, and thought it'd be a nice place to bring my mom. Short flight, and then a train brings us to Barcelona Sands. Dropped off the bags at the hotel and walked over to Passeig de Gracia, one of the most famous avenues with houses designed by Gaudi such as Casa Mila and Casa Batlló. Barcelona is just designed so well. Continued to walk and eventually made it to the Gothic Quarter. Definitely different from the rest of the city's super block design. The historic neighborhood has narrow streets and even ruins from the Romans. Found a lunch deal with paella and tapas for lunch for €16 before continuing the city walk. Seafood rice in Barcelona is a lot more dry compared with stew style seafood rice in Lisbon, but it's difficult to pick a favorite. Spent the rest of the afternoon at Park Güell. Nice to stroll around and admire the design choices and the views of Barcelona and the Mediterranean Sea. It's a shame that entrance tickets are quite expensive for tourists, unlike a free Central Park in New York, for example, but it's understandable. Barcelona has a bit of a over tourism crisis. It's my second time in Park Güell, so nothing too surprising, but I could still appreciate the relaxing nature. Again, just grateful I was able to spend time with my mom and kind of serve as a tour guide. Dinner was amazing. Ordered way too much food, but this steak was one of the best cuts I've ever had for such an amazing price. Spanish food is definitely one of my favorites. Day 2 started off with Sagrada Familia, the must visit when in Barcelona. Again, my second time here, but I think this is extremely worth it. Here's a recommendation: always book your tickets here as early as possible. They will sell out. I learned this from the first time I visited Spain when it was extremely difficult to buy tickets even a week in advance to go some places. Also try to go early in the morning to catch the light through the stained glass. Designs on this basilica leaves me speechless. Every detail has so much intention behind it. The exterior tells the stories from the Bible and the interior is minimalistic. The glass on the east is blue and the glass on the west is orange. So many things to observe. It's been under construction for over 100 years now, and progress has been made since the last time I was here too. Eventually took a visit up the towers once again. It's a bit anticlimactic, so many people will find it not worth it, but it's just a few dollars more and it's a once in a lifetime, or in my case, twice in a lifetime experience. After a morning of appreciating the basilica, took a quick detour to San Pao Hospital before heading to the beach. The weather wasn't too great, so kind of had to make it quick. Explored some nearby parks before heading back to the hotel to dodge the rain. Final day was a day trip to Montserrat Monastery. Highly recommend the Trans Montserrat, which was 50 euros at the time I purchased, and it includes a round trip transportation ticket from Barcelona to Montserrat Monastery, as well as entry to see the Black Madonna in the Basilica, and of course, unlimited funicular rides near the monastery. Views were great, and it was nice to step away from the city and enjoy the peace. The mountains are so unique with the pillar rocks. In fact, it is said to have inspired the design of the Sagrada Familia. Caught a performance of the Escolania Choir, which requires an additional ticket to be purchased online, and it can be quite crowded, so do get there early if you want to find a better place to sit. Anyways, have a listen. It was a short performance, so before long, it was up the mountain with the funicular. Great views and a selection of hiking trails. If you're lucky, you can even spot mountain goats. Eventually, it was time to head back to Barcelona and get ready for yet another travel day tomorrow. Travel day began with transit to the airport, and Barcelona makes it easy enough. This is where the second half of the trip begins. My mom returned to the US while I continued my grad trip by meeting up with a friend. It was supposed to be with three other close friends who also graduated, but two of them couldn't make it, so it'd just be me and one friend. I guess the four of us had our grad trip last year when we went to Japan. The plan today is to connect in Athens for a flight to Santorini. Aegean Airlines was surprisingly nice. They provided a piece of candy as we boarded, and there was even meal service with a Greek pastry. I've flown a number of European carriers, and this almost never happens in economy class. Flew past the Sorrentine Peninsula, and I'll be back here soon. It's really cool that I get to have a preview from the plane window. About an hour later, it was time to land. The mountains looked really amazing. Sometime I'll have to return to Athens to see the Acropolis too. On the ground, I was met with another bus. This was not ideal because I had about 50 minutes before my next flight departed, but luckily, the gate for my next flight was right across from where I got off the bus. Once again, wonderful flight with Aegean. Made it to Santorini, and they gave us a granola bar as we deplaned since it was too short of a flight for in-flight service. So this is my first time in Greece. The Greek islands are something else. My friend would land just 40 minutes after I did, so thankfully I didn't have to wait for long. Took a bus towards Fira, and the views are great, but yet to see the dramatic views I've seen online. Checked into the accommodation, which wasn't the fanciest, but it would get the job done. Had some Greek food for dinner and got a preview of the caldera, except it was too dark at night to really be able to see. Ended the night with the dessert and pretty comfortable first evening in Greece. Started the next day pretty late. Saw the sunrise from the room, but went back to sleep because it was way too early, so unfortunately no footage yet, but I got it later, so trust you'll be able to see it. Went caldera side, and it definitely looks better during the day. Had some Greek coffee and fruits for breakfast before making the Fira to Oya hike. It was brutal under the sun, but the views made it worth it, and the hike itself wasn't too challenging. Had some delicious gyros for lunch and explored Oya for a bit. This is where the pictures you see online are usually taken. Blue domed, white churches. There was a long line for the actual spot, so I just took some pics nearby and called it. Eventually, made our way back to Fira, and the sunsets here are just unmatched. Golden hour on caldera of an active volcano filled with water. Had some seafood pasta for dinner, and that was about it. Just taking it easy because didn't want my friend to be fighting jet lag. Day 2 in Greece started even later. Went to a bakery and got a pastry and smoothie, and since it was pretty much already lunchtime, went to get gyros right after. Not as good as yesterday, but it gets the job done. Afternoon plan was a catamaran cruise. I was really looking forward to it because this would be the first opportunity for me to swim. Sailing through the blue waters was just amazing, and there were plenty of opportunities to swim. The water was a bit colder than I expected though, but this water especially just felt unreal. Look at how turquoise it is. Continued sailing, and I just don't think the camera does it justice. These cliffs are huge. We had a personal chef on board, and it was awesome. She was cooking food straight from scratch: pita, tzatziki, chicken, sausage, and spaghetti, and there were even mussels and shrimp. As the sun was setting, it was time to head back to shore, and that was basically the day. Next day was yet another travel day, and here's the sunrise as promised. Next destination, Mykonos. We are Greek island hopping. Greek ferries are no joke. Boarding is extremely chaotic and do get there early. Seats are quite comfortable though, but I think we did get really lucky because it was a very smooth trip. Some ferry trips are very turbulent. Disembarking at Mykonos was once again chaotic, and trying to find my suitcase amid all the people was not fun at all. First impressions of Mykonos were good though. Unfortunately, feeling a little bit lethargic because I might have caught a cold from swimming yesterday, and it was really windy in Mykonos. No dramatic cliffs here, but the streets felt more aesthetic. Still the same white and blue, but more trees, plants, and flowers here, and just easier to walk. Had gyros again for lunch, and they're just an affordable, healthy option. Took a nap in the afternoon and explored more during golden hour. Mykonos is one of the most popular party destinations, and the clubs and bars were already getting started. Had seafood pasta again and checked out the clubs later before calling it a day. Next day, took a bus to a party beach. The water is so clear and it was so nice to swim, but I stepped on something and cut my foot pretty bad, so swimming was cut short unfortunately. Ordered some food and relaxed, but went back early to make a dinner reservation at one of the most upper class restaurants I've ever been. Food was good, but it was just way too expensive and the portions were kind of disappointing. Good views, though this might be a once in a lifetime experience for me. And guess what? It's another travel day. We'll have quite a few more of these. But our flight wasn't until 7 p.m., so spent the day stalling at cafes before eventually taking a bus to the airport. Taxis are really expensive on the Greek islands, and it would probably be 8x the price for a person. But if you have a large group, it could make sense to split the cost, which will average it down a lot. While the Greek islands are nice, I was ready to leave. No more having to deal with salty tap water. After a whole day of bumming around at cafes, it was finally time to fly to Napoli. First time in Italy too, so new country unlocked once again. I've been warned about Napoli a lot, so I expected the worst, but in reality, it's just a bit chaotic like New York or Chicago, but I didn't stay long enough to really find out. Booked it towards Sorrento with the train, and it was much calmer out there. Had my first ever Italian pizza, and that was the day. Started the next day with beautiful balcony views, and then a quick walk to a cafe for a croissant and an espresso. I definitely committed some cultural faux pas, but hopefully they don't remember. After breakfast, headed towards Pompeii. It was much larger than I expected. I visited ruins in the past, and they're usually a small area, but this was a whole city. Spent the whole afternoon walking around and listening to the audio guide, exploring the basilica, the houses, the bathhouses, and so many more. This was a very complex city, and to this day, it's still being uncovered. Parts of the city are still being excavated. If you like history and spending an afternoon walking around ruins, I highly recommend this place. For me, it was a bit overwhelming though. So much of the information went right over my head because there was just so much. Eventually, exhausted by the information, I decided to head back. But I spent a whole afternoon here. Made it back to the place we were staying and searched for some Italian food for dinner. The cliffs by the sea were once again breathtaking, but at this point, they aren't even that surprising anymore though. What do you know? Another day of traveling. This time on the way to the Amalfi Coast. Made our way to Sorrento to catch a ferry. This one wasn't as smooth as the one in Greece, and there were some bumpy parts in the ride, but it was much less chaotic. Sailed along the peninsula and stopped in Positano before continuing to Amalfi. Was hoping to get better views from the window, but I think they need some cleaning. Almost 2 hours and finally made it to Amalfi. Took a bus up to Agrola to our accommodation and just relaxed there for the evening. It was a bit of a hassle to use the buses, but it works. Forgot to mention, definitely bring cash because it seems buses are cash only. This was quite the accommodation. It had great views, and I can only imagine what it's like to actually live here and not just be a tourist. For dinner, of course, had to get Italian food, and this restaurant was really surprisingly good. Nice and easy day. I feel like most days we just focus on one thing, and that day is centered around it. Case in point, day two on the Amalfi Coast was centered around hiking. More specifically, hiking the Path of the Gods towards Positano. It worked out perfectly because our accommodation was walking distance to the trail. The clouds were much needed. It made the scenery so much better, and it's hard to believe that we were over 2,000 feet above sea level. Did not feel like our bus from Amalfi climbed that much yesterday. Being the same level as the clouds is something else. It kind of reminded me of my experience at Machu Picchu. The hike was pretty comfortable. It wasn't the most challenging thing, but definitely required some effort. The stairs down certainly isn't for everyone. Over 1,500 feet elevation drop from start to finish. The hike took us about 3 hours, and make sure the weather is good because there really isn't anywhere to hide if you're stranded in the middle. The scenery is simply stunning, but I think a week of seeing cliffs everywhere has maybe numbed me. After about 3 hours, finally made it to Positano and grabbed a sandwich for light lunch before heading over to the beach and hopping in the water. It felt so good to cool off and swim with beautiful scenery around. After a few hours, it was time to take the bus back to Amalfi and then back to Agarola. The buses are something else. They're packed, so just be mindful if you decide to visit during peak season. Shout out to the bus drivers for navigating such narrow roads too. Went back to the same restaurant as yesterday for dinner, but forgot to record. Only 3 more days before going back home, and early morning flight to Copenhagen tomorrow, so decided to head back to Napoli to spend the night there. Instead of going back via Sorrento, went through Salerno instead. Much less crowded bus and much less crowded train. No more having to deal with the Circumvesuviana. Caught a fast and smooth train back to Napoli with no stops and explored the rest of the day. Napoli is quite the gritty city, but as long as I'm not getting mugged, the graffiti and worn down buildings don't bother me. Got some Neapolitan pizza and it was an amazing value. Only €6 for Michelin pizza. Continued to just walk around and eventually stumbled upon a mall that looks like the one in Milan, but that was about it. I wouldn't mind coming back to Napoli in the future. It's not as bad as people say it is online, but I guess just gotta be careful. And next morning started early, an 8-minute walk to the airport from the Airbnb for a 7 a.m. flight back to Copenhagen. Of course, it was cold and gray when we landed in Denmark. Reminds me of the exchange semester. Showed my friend some of the tourist locations and around the city, and even went for a cold plunge eventually. It's kind of a shame that my friends weren't able to visit me during my exchange semester. I could have hosted them, but it is what it is. Better late than never. Seems my cold tolerance has gotten much worse because I could barely stay in the water for more than 10 seconds, and it was already mid-June. Hit up Refn for some street food and met up with another friend in the evening at a pub to watch the World Cup, but that was about it. Final full day of the trip, weather was much better. This is the Scandinavian summer I remembered. First thing in the morning was bakery, Juno the bakery of course, and then bike to the library, the true Danish experience. I used to go on runs and bike here all the time. Made some sandwiches for lunch the Danish way at the library and did some work before going for another cold plunge in the afternoon, but this time in the city harbor. Made yet another bakery stop, got a Bakery Max before a Danish dinner at the meatpacking district. Ended the day watching the World Cup again, and the European lifestyle just feels so much more laid back. And then it was time to go home. 3 weeks in Europe is over. Went for a cold plunge yet again in Nordhavn before heading to the airport. I wish I could have stayed longer at each place, but got a nice taste of each location this time. Hopefully I'll be able to come back again. Stopped in Iceland briefly before making it back to the States. An amazing trip, but so much traveling is tiring. For me, travels lets me appreciate what other countries do better, but returning home provides comfort. Thanks for making it to the end. This is my last summer break ever, so I'm so grateful I had this opportunity to travel before starting work, but I'm ready for the next chapter in life.